Thank you, everybody, and welcome to this conversation. As we've been in the pandemic, we have been spending a lot more time online, seeking social connection. And during this time, we've seen a spike in response to during the pandemic against violence against women. And most of the time, women are finding themselves trapped at home with their abusers. We've seen a spike in violence take place inside their homes in the form of physical and sexual abuse, domestic and family violence, and controlling behavior. We've also seen a spike in violence against women in digital spaces in the form of cyberbullying, non-consensual sharing of photos, harassment, and threats. In this session, we're bringing together influencers, content creators, UN global advocates, and representatives from the biggest digital platforms to discuss how social and digital can create a culture that is safe for women and girls on and offline. We're going to show you guys a video where we asked a group of content creators from around the world about toxic masculinity and how it leads to violence against women and girls and what men can do to become a part of the solution. Let's see the video.
There's so many things that perpetuate male dominance and male aggression, and one of the things that we should be focusing on is one that we have a bit of control over, which is what happens in our own home. From such a young age, boys and girls are divided in terms of the activities, the content that they watch, the clothes that they wear, and the toys that they're given. And that breeds a stark difference in character development.
The biggest thing men can do is be incredibly vocal, not letting friends get away with things, checking friends when they're using rhetoric or using language that is, potentially problematic.
It's been said that the root of all violence is shame, and men are full of shame. We shame our boys for having feelings. Men are told that they can't feel, that they have to be strong.
When you allow men to express their vulnerabilities, when you allow men to be human, you help them with their own empathy.
Men need to dismantle the old paradigms and the old belief systems that emotions equal weakness. And once we can start actually feeling more emotions as men, we can then have more compassion for ourselves, which will then project compassion for others.
As a content creator, I think there is a lot of responsibility for us, particularly men, to really showcase how we can be allies with women.
Without male-imposed barriers, I would feel equal, I would feel safe, and I would be able to thrive.
In a world where there's that true safety and equality, I would be a lot more bold. I would probably take more affirmative actions and stand up for my ideas with greater force and integrity.
And to get the conversation started, I would like to introduce our panelists. We have Karuna Nain, who is the Director for Global Safety Policy at Facebook. We have Cecilia Suárez, who is a UN Global Advocate for Spotlight Initiative and also an actress. We have Patricia Georgiou, who is the Head of Partnerships and Business Development at Google Jigsaw. We have Kolisi, who is also a UN Global Advocate for Spotlight Initiative and South Africa's rugby team captain. We also have Louis Cole, who is a filmmaker and YouTuber. Amanda DuPont, who is an actress and television host. And myself, I am Amber Whittington, a YouTuber, actress, and activist. So to kick this off, I would love to speak to Louis and Amanda. Could you tell us what violence you have seen or experienced online?
I think living in South Africa, violence is not only online, it's in our real life. But I think online, people are so comfortable and confident to bully other people, to say, especially to women, like derogatory things. We get DMs that are absolutely absurd and rude and really subject us as women. But I think for us, the movement is not just online, it's in our everyday life as well. When we leave our homes, we don't leave feeling safe. We almost have to tell someone where we are at all times, and that's the society that we're living in today.
Yeah, absolutely. Louis, could you share with us what kind of violence that you've seen against women and girls, also in online and offline?
Yeah. I think it's it's a really complex issue because I don't see a lot of really obvious aggressive violence in my day-to-day life, but I do see a lot of aggression, hostility, and anger online, whether it's in comment sections or some of the content that's just out there on various platforms. And I just think it's probably a much more deep-rooted cultural thing of aggression and the fact that there's a culture that men aren't able to or aren't taught to deal with emotions. And I think that's one of the things that can lead to violence against women and girls and others. And I've seen just a lot of aggression in some of my friends or people I'm acquainted with. And like in real life, I guess I haven't seen many kind of physical assaults on women. I've seen a couple and I've tried to intervene, and that's been a really interesting experience for me. But I do see a lot of aggression, which I'm like, okay, if this isn't dealt with, I wonder what's happening behind closed doors.
Yeah, definitely. To question to both of you, do you think that it has increased, or have you seen an increase of violence against women and girls, specifically because you're content creators online? I know I have, especially during this pandemic. Have you experienced that?
Yeah, I've seen a huge increase in violence. I mean, TikTok went on to have that trend of the calling for pizza thing, because that's how many women are in trouble, that they actually have a cheat code to let people know that they're in trouble. But like I was saying, for us here, it's like daily life, it's a problem. It started off with boyfriends killing their girlfriends. I mean, we had a story last week where the girl was at the police station reporting a violence case, and her boyfriend came in and shot her. So it's just like all these cases are just becoming, I don't know if it's becoming normalized. And we also just had girls who were saved from a house where they had been taken for human trafficking. So it's just like, when does it stop? And I'm seeing this happen more and more often. And I will be honest, there is a positive movement online and on social media, because more and more people are speaking up about gender-based violence and violence against women. And I have seen men standing up. So it's not completely negative. There's a conversation brewing where some men are saying enough is enough, and where do we draw the line? And it's also up to them to be the example that they want other men to turn out to be.
Absolutely. Louis, have you seen it increase?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen the increase myself, but I've heard a lot of different people talking about how, obviously, in the lockdown, people are trapped at home, like you said at the beginning, trapped with their abusers. And I was literally talking to one of my friends yesterday, and they said their cousin had been, they hadn't been able to contact their cousin for a month and a half because she was in an abusive relationship, and the boyfriend had essentially kind of basically taken her hostage and was being abusive in that relationship. And I think one of the problems right now is, obviously there's a lot of hardship in the world, and it's been amplified because of COVID, and people have been losing jobs, and there's a lot more stress. And again, because I feel like there's not a healthy education for men in terms of how to express when they're going through issues, or emotionally how to express themselves, because of this kind of inaccurate masculine role model that we're shown at, growing up. I think that can lead to unresolved issues. And then if you're trapped in that space, in a small space, I think that's one of the elements why it's probably increased a lot right now, is like that's added stress, and there's no way of escaping being in the household. So yeah, I've heard domestic violence has really skyrocketed right now. And it's a massive issue.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, social media, we already know, being content creators, it can already be a tough place because people are on social media. They are constantly comparing and contrasting themselves to others and wanting, maybe someone else's life. So that already was, created some type of, violence with cyberbullying or people being aggressive to others and things like that. So during this pandemic, it's really heightened people's feelings and depression. and we don't have enough outlets for people to learn how to treat others, especially dealing with toxic masculinity, like you were just saying, Louis. So that's one of the reasons why I'm happy to have people here. So next, I would like to talk to Cecilia and how you use your platform being a successful and famous actress, and how you use that to combat some of these issues and speak out about it. So could you tell me a little bit about how you've used your platform to speak out against femicide and gender-based violence, and what has inspired you to use your platform to raise awareness?
Well, I post information, a variety of information. To give you an example, like a sign to ask for help, which is this: if they fold their hand like this, that's a woman who needs help and who's in danger. So just passing on that kind of information, I think is pretty important. Talking about rights also, the fact that you don't have to live in a violent environment, and you have a right to live otherwise. And the inspiration comes from observing what goes on in my own country, in Mexico, and the level of violence that we live in general, but how it has been an intense focus on women, and the need for it to change, the hope for it to change.
Definitely.
A different reality, to different and girls.
Cecilia, do you mind repeating that last sentence? I think you cut out a bit.
Hoping for a reality, hoping for a different way of living for women and girls, also for boys and men. And usually when we talk about this, at least in my country, we often think to leave, but we tend to leave the guys out of the conversation. And I think it's a priority to keep them in the conversation, to have new role models for them on another type of masculinity, and how they can explore various ways of being a man and what it means being a man. So as the mother of a male child, I'm very concerned about that.
Definitely. Representation is a big deal, and positive representation and positive role models. So I'm happy to have Sia here to speak about that issue. But one more question for you, Cecilia. What kind of response have you received from your audience when you're speaking out about these issues?
Support. I understand I can see clearly the need for this information, and how we are starting to open up about receiving this information and being able to use it and being able to pass it on as well, because that's another thing that we try to that I try to convey, that on the one hand side. And then I have male friends asking questions, and I don't have the answers, but we do start a conversation, and I find that fascinating and important. And it also keeps the conversation with my own child going at all times. So that's been very rewarding.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Cecilia.
No, my pleasure.
Oh, did you have one more?
I have I'm really concerned going on with children. And one of the topics that I've been focusing on, because of me being a mother, is how early are kids getting pornography through the internet?
Yes.
And it's appalling. It is appalling. And how this is impacting their first sexual experiencing is tremendous, because the level of violence that pornography contains has become higher, more intense, more violent. And that has an impact on their first experiences. So I do have a recommendation for that, which is this book for children. Good Images, Bad Images. This is the Spanish version, Imágenes Buenas, Imágenes Malas. And it is a very intelligent guide for parents to read with girls or boys on what pornography is, how they can protect themselves from it, what they can do if another friend, girl, or tries to wear pornography to them. We have to talk about as well to prevent violence, gender violence.
Absolutely.
It's major.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for for bringing that up. My nephew is 9 years old and we're experiencing this right now. Just from normal social media activity and him Googling some of the videos that he's watching videos that we have to take his phone and sit down and over explain to him. So that is definitely an issue that we need to combat and figure out how to do that, as well as maybe create some type of way to educate these kids at school, or find a way to talk about that and incorporate it in class. But that's something that we could bring up also with Karuna and Patricia.
I agree.
Yeah, definitely. But I would love to, thank you so much, Cecilia. I would love to take it to Sia.
My pleasure.
And, you know, Cecilia was just bringing up a really important point of representation. So I'm really happy to have you here, being a male in sports, being, you know, a captain and being very well known and successful in your sport. Why did you decide to speak out about these issues? And tell us if you've had a personal connection to anything.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's for me. It's obviously from a young age. I've seen the violence to the people that mean the most to me, which was my mom and my aunt, and yeah, they got abused when I was younger, and it was supposed to be people that really obviously loves them and cares for them, you know, and there's nothing I could have done. I was a young boy. I think I was only like 5 or 6 years old. And I couldn't do anything about it then. I remember waking up at like 3 o'clock in the morning, crying, and no, I was in my underwear, and I freak out, you know. And also from when two males are fighting, that also used to break me, because I think that's where the problem starts, is when two males argue. You know, it doesn't end there. It always ends in violence. And I think they get used to that so much that you think everything gets sorted out with violence, and then when they talk to females as well, they do exactly the same thing. And that's kind of how I grew up in the environment. And it starts, as Amanda said, then it starts to become normal. You know, for me, I see it over and over, and I think that's the way to go. Fortunately, I got moved out of the environment. I got a bursary to go to a school, a model C school. But every time I go back home, my friends didn't come out. They saw it over and over. Then they started doing it. And then I thought, okay, you know what? I'm not doing it, so it's not a problem. And I never told them to stop, because I thought, you know what? I'm not doing the violence. Now I'm starting to learn and unlearn so many things that it's actually every single time I'm like, I want to have these conversations more and more so that I can be educated.
Hi, Patricia. Hi, Karuna. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. Being at Google and Facebook, the two biggest platforms in the world, I would love to ask you a question on how we're going to combat these issues. And so first, I would like to ask, is there any data or evidence to show that women and girls are subjected to a higher rate of violence online?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Definitely what we're seeing is that, first of all, online violence against women is extremely prevalent. It's a widely, severely experienced issue across the globe. So one of our most recent research shows that over 85% of women with internet access have either personally experienced or seen online violence happening to someone else in the past 12 months. And more than 1/3, about 40% of the women have personally experienced that online violence. And in terms of how that compares to men, a study by the European Women's Lobby called Her Net, Her Rights shows that globally, women are 27 times more likely to be the victims of cyber violence compared to men. 27 times more. It's just absolutely staggering. And, you know, that doesn't start with adulthood. That starts at the very, very young age. Earlier, we were talking about child sexual abuse. 87% of all reported such images actually depicted girls. 1 of 10 women experienced cyber violence by the age of 15. So the numbers are definitely staggering. And what is equally concerning is the impact of that online violence. Because online violence is basically making the world more dangerous for women. and it's forcing them out of society, journalism, politics, economy, because increasingly our lives and the world is online. And because of the violence, if women are disappearing from these public spaces, it means that the gender gap might increase. So, for example, we see 50% of women don't believe that the internet is a safe space to express their opinions. So basically, they end up self-censoring and not sharing their opinions online. 75% of women change how they use social media after experiencing or seeing online violence. Almost a third of them either decrease their internet usage or completely shut down their accounts. And that, digital fear can also translate to offline violence, because, the different types of harassment can be including violent threats against women or their families. And that is particularly true for women who are on the front lines of our democracies and societies. So female journalists, activists, politicians, they regularly receive death threats, rape threats, abduction threats. And the impact of that is that almost 50% of journalists stop reporting on a story because they don't want to risk that violence, or they revert to covering more gender appropriate topics. And so we're losing a lot of that potentially important journalism or contribution by women in various spaces of our democracy. Politically active women are being forced to take a break from advocacy, or they drop out of races because it's too dangerous to have a public profile or express their opinions. As you might remember, a couple of years ago, female politicians in the UK chose not to participate in parliamentary elections. So in all of these different spaces, societal, political, personal, economic spaces, we can see how that online violence is basically driving women out and potentially having an impact on the global economy as well. There's a study, for example, in Australia in 2019 that found that the online abuse and trolling had cost the economy about 4 billion Australian dollars of lost income, medical costs, etc. So for sure, the violence is not just extremely prevalent and severe, disproportionately impacting women, not to mention the intersectional dimension of it, but it can also have a global impact on society, economy, political activities, gender in a gender neutral way. So a failure to address that could really have a really broad impact beyond just the gender gap.
Yeah, definitely. Have you seen an increase, through Google during this pandemic? And I would like to ask you, Karuna, the same question, being at Facebook. But have you seen an increase during this pandemic?
For sure, COVID-19 is the first pandemic in the age of social media. And with the resulting quarantine measures, people have obviously spent more time online. I think a recent study has shown that the increase in internet usage is between 50 to 70%, which is huge. And that also means a greater reliance on social media platforms for personal, collective engagement. So also increased exposure to online violence. So, that might impact disproportionately people with less digital skills. And obviously, there's also a connection in terms of, for the women, the offline trends. The UN has tracked this very well. There's a really staggering data reported recently on how the lockdowns have really increased offline/domestic violence. In France, for example, where I'm from, there has been an increase by 30% since March. In other countries, it's the same increased range. And the UNFPA projections suggest that for every additional 3 months of shutdowns, you could have an additional 15 million cases of gender-based offline violence. And so we see this mirror between the offline and the online violence increase.
Definitely. Wow. Karuna, I would like to ask you the same question. Could you answer for me if you've seen an increase during pandemic and what that stat looks like during the pandemic? And also, could you address how your platform will combat and address violence against women and girls?
Absolutely. Let me start with the second question first, because I think that will be a really good way to, segue into what we are thinking about and how we're addressing the pandemic and our response there and what we're seeing on our platforms. So to start with, how do we really think about women's safety on Facebook? We want to try and take a 5-point approach. And first and foremost, start with really building partnerships around the world, because we want to make sure that we are not just being responsive to what we're seeing because we are headquartered here in the US. So making sure that we're speaking to women's organizations around the world, women who are on the front lines, women journalists, women policymakers, women sports people, just to understand from them on how the platform can be used as an opportunity, but also being used to silence some of the conversations that they want to have, so that we are building our platform in the right way. And based on those conversations, we want to make sure that we have the right policies in place. So these policies really define what people can and cannot share on our platforms. And then third, also these conversations will help inform our product experiences. So not just the user controls that we provide people, but also the proactive technologies that we can run at the back end to detect some of this content and make sure that it never makes the light of day on our platforms. And finally, also making sure that people have resources or places to go to on our platform so that they can get help and support if they're encountering some of this behavior on our services. So if you take the issue of non-consensual sharing of intimate images, for example, and someone brought this up earlier in the conversation, we want to make sure that we are following the same 5-point approach, that we're speaking to groups around the world who are on the front lines, who are running helplines, who are supporting people who are going through that horrible experience, to understand from them what victims really go through. And that really informs our policy development. So on Facebook, for example, not only can you not share intimate images or videos without someone's consent, you can't even threaten to share that content on our platforms. A threat is enough for us to take action and actually, penalize the person who's posting that content. And then the product experience also is informed by those conversations. So we not only allow people to report this content to us so that we know that this is being shared without someone's consent and we can take it down, but we are now able to run proactive detection on the back to check if someone's uploading someone's intimate image without their consent. So we can send it to a reviewer and make sure that it doesn't live on our platforms if it actually violates our policies. And then resources, we have something called Not Without Our Consent on the Facebook Safety Center that contains support systems for people who are going through this experience, because it can be so traumatic to think that your intimate image is out there, you're being blackmailed by someone that if you don't continue in the relationship or if you don't do X, Y, or Z, I'm going to expose your images. So we want to give people a space where they can actually go and get help, find out which organizations they can reach out to actually speak to someone to get that kind of help and support. So when it comes to COVID, once we saw the UN Secretary General's call to action, where he really shined the spotlight on the issue of domestic abuse and the unique risk that women face if they're sheltering at home with their abusers, we really wanted to try and see what more we could do in that situation. So we immediately reached out to the National Network to End Domestic Violence in the US, UN Women, and other organizations to understand from them what resources they had and how could our platforms play a role in amplifying some of those resources to people around the world, not just the victim themselves, but also friends and family who may be concerned, that I have a friend, I haven't heard from her for instance a month, as someone mentioned, how can I support them? I don't want to put them at greater risk by asking them a question if they're sitting at home with their abuser who's observing all their technology and who, they have no space to reach out and get help and support. So we, on the COVID Information Center, which is a one-stop shop we created to get people reliable information, we added some of those tips that had been created by UN Women by NNEDV so that people would be able to access them. And we also let people know through alerts, through little units on their newsfeed, that these tips and these resources are out there. In terms of actual data and what did we see on our platforms, every quarter we release something called our Community Standards Enforcement Report, where we try and shine the light on how much of this content are we seeing on our platform, how much of it are we relying on user reports, and how much of it are we able to proactively detect using our technologies. And we've been making that report public. The last report just covered 2 months of the pandemic, so the next report will have a lot more data that would be interesting for this group to be able to slice and dice. But one of the things I do want to call out is, similar to most organizations who are on the front lines helping people, we too have been impacted. Our review community has also been impacted because they can't be coming into offices, and some of this content is so sensitive, we can't have them reviewing it at homes. It's just not great for people's well-being or also the safety and privacy of our users. So that has been something which has also impacted our lives, in which we've been navigating and finding a solution for. And of course we all know that we don't this is not just, about to end. So we are thinking through what is our long-term strategy here as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think because there's been such an increase of people online, that's probably been more of an obstacle as well, as because I understand the levels of when something gets flagged, it goes through, certain people. And so I'm sure that has increased a lot, as well as you guys having issues with being able to get through all of that properly. I appreciate you talking about that, and as well as giving us the answers of how the biggest platforms in the world are combating this. So I heard global initiatives, policy, and creating resources for people to be able to go to understand how to deal with this. So thank you so much for that. And Sia, thank you so much for rejoining us. I would love to continue the conversation that we left off, and you were expressing what you've seen and how you were noticing a change or noticing that you needed to change your behavior in order to change others around you. So when you were younger, you kind of just let your friends do those things, and if you felt like if you weren't contributing to that, then you weren't a part of the problem, but now you're seeing it a different way. Could you explain that again for us?
Yeah, so I was saying, like, when I was younger, when I would hear my mom or my aunt crying, like, there's nothing I could have done, right? And then I got older as well. I just kept quiet. But I'm like, then I started listening to women, who's speaking about the experiences they've had. They feel so helpless, like, there's nothing they can do. And sometimes there's men around the environment. And I started saying, you know what? I mean, that's how my mom felt. That's how my aunt felt. And now I can actually make a difference, And even now, I remember the other day I had a media conference and there was a guy speaking badly to a lady. And I'm like, am I actually going to keep quiet? I said something there, and it's small. It could be something small. There was no violence involved, but it starts like that. So I started doing that. And then also to change the mindset of my kids. When I was young, my aunts or uncles, my uncle, would work, and then they would bring home the money, and then my aunt and them would just cook, and the men do nothing else after that. They never clean, they never wash dishes, never do anything like that. And then now I'm like, actually, that's not right. Even my wife is like, she tells me, you gotta go wash the dishes. I'm busy, I'm working, Times have changed. It's 2020. Women do bring bread to the house. And it's got to be fair. Like, we equal in the house. The stuff that she's good at that I'm not good at, and the stuff that I'm good at she's not good at. So in front of my kids, I want them to see that I can clean, I can cook, I can do everything else that my wife can do. So can she do everything I can do too. We were in the safari this weekend, and we're driving through the safari, and there was this couple that their car got stopped. Their tire popped, and they didn't know how to take out the wheel, and I didn't know what to do. My wife was like, step aside, let me show you what to do. I actually posted it on social media, and I stood there, I was embarrassed, but I was so proud of it. And it just reminded me once again how equal we are, and we need to start seeing that. But sometimes in our cultures, in our environment, it keeps on telling us, like, no, men are here and women are here, and men can do these things and women can't. And I'm making sure that I'm actually trying to like make sure that there's nothing like that. There's no borders anymore. We equal, and it's hard because some of this stuff you get taught by your family members, by your uncles, and all of that. Now I must have those difficult conversations with them and let them know, like, if this is how you guys are doing things still, I'm not gonna be part of this. I'm not supporting this, and it's hard to do even with the friends as well, letting them know this is the way that I'm going now.
Wow, thank you for that. I love what you share online. It's amazing. And so with that being said, how have you been received? And then do you think that it's really important for a male in sports to share these type of things to combat the toxic masculinity like we were explaining earlier?
Yeah, of course. I really think it's important, and it's been received all right. You can see a lot of males don't really like, they only like when I post about sport. Then when I start speaking about this, and you can see by like how many people are looking at it, like it just drops, and that concerns me. And to me, right now, that's more important than me playing on the field, because this is something that's been going on before the pandemic, and it's grown during the pandemic, and it's probably still going to be there if men don't get involved in this. And I think like it's a human issue. That's the thing. You don't have to be a male or female. It's not a male or female problem. It's a human issue. If you're not feeling anything for this, if you're staying silent right now, I mean, you're just saying, okay, you know what, I'm not part of this. You know, it breaks me, some of the stories that we had to read. I think Amanda said some of them. You know, lady getting killed while she's pregnant by the boyfriend. And the problem is, then you go to the police and then they start investigating the victim. That doesn't make sense to me. I think, especially in our country, for the pandemic, to keep people inside, they drop the army, they drop the police to make sure that people don't go outside their houses. But for gender-based violence, nothing like that happened, you know, and that concerns me, you know. And then you go to the police station. First of all, it's full of men who don't care, and they hear this so many times that they get over it. And if you're a kid underage, you're not allowed to go report. And sometimes it's someone in your own house that's doing this to you. You know, you can't bring them to also report them. I think they should make it more good, like easier for people to go report it. Like we need people in police station strictly work on gender-based violence, and it needs to be women sometimes, you know, because how can like most men understand what the woman is explaining, what the woman is going through? Because you just you just said a few words or he just hit you a little bit. And that's some of the things, that's how normal it's becoming in our country. If you're not dying, it's not too bad. And it's scary. I mean, it has to stop by the language on how you talk to someone.
Absolutely. You bring up a really good point. And that's something that I wanted to ask Patricia and Karuna before we ended. If there is something like this, what Sia was explaining is there should be someone in the police station that can understand violence against women directly. Is there in the future, is there now or in the future any organization or resource that women can run to, maybe globally, or if it's just in certain places where they can, you know, call and receive help and help that makes sense to their situation?
I can start with that answer if that works. So just, you know, again, when COVID struck, one of the things we were really concerned about was, do women have a place to call and get help and support, or even those concerned and friends and family members that I talked about? So we did this exercise where we worked with UN Women, the National Network to End Domestic Violence, and the Women Shelters Group, and we collated this directory of national level helplines around the world where people could reach out to and get some of this help and support. It now lives on the Facebook Safety Center, but it contains only national rebel resources. So one of the things we're hoping to do is use this as a jumping off point to build something that's far more granular. So at the state, city level, who are the organizations you can reach out to, not just for like, you know, guidance or help, but also very specific needs that women may have, like shelters or legal aid. So we're hoping to really continue that project and go down that road long term. But one of the other things we did was also we're very worried that people may be at home and may not be able to actually pick up the phone and call. So we started piloting out working with helplines who currently run voice-based helplines on what that would look like if they change to a text-based service. So in 2 countries in Latin America, we launched WhatsApp-based helplines working with the local governments and nonprofits to really understand and learn what are some of the best practices of making this transition, because there's a lot of training you have to do of the helpline representatives. How do you show care? How do you show empathy? But at the same time, how do you make sure you are, you know, really supporting the victim and teaching them about their safety of their own devices, which they're using to have some of that communication. So we're also trying out some of those initiatives to build out more support resources which are actually accessible given the unique needs that COVID has sprung up for people in these situations.
Thank you for sharing that. Patricia, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, thank you. In addition to everything that Tia and Karina raised, which I completely agree with, I think that, you know, everything we've been discussing really highlights the fact that the online violence and also offline violence against women is really a multidimensional problem that requires a multi-stakeholder approach. We're not going to be able to fix this issue if we just focus on one part of the ecosystem. And it really is about, as Kuna was saying earlier, partnering with different organizations, with the policymakers, with law enforcement, to really put in place a flow that starts from, you know, honestly, from the very root cause of the problem, which is at education level. making sure there are policies in place and better incentives for the educational level to be really teaching children from the very young age, as Cecilia was saying also about her own child, that at the very beginning you have to equip people with a different perception of societal roles of gender that will, help have better online and offline behaviors as the children grow. So there is really like this flow of starting with education, also building more regulatory tools, because in a lot of countries right now, what happens online is not even potentially an infraction to the current legislation. So there has to be also an adjustment of the policy so that bad behavior online is equally reprehensible as offline behavior. And there are also penalties in place that will deter people from engaging into those activities. Because if you're not raising the costs to perpetuate online violence, then people will continue to do it without any accountability, without any penalties, and also with a lot of scale, because on the internet you can do something with a few free clicks, you reach millions of people. So you have to raise the cost of online violence as well. And that's really at the policymakers level and legislation. And then also equipping the implementation part of the ecosystem, like the police and other organizations who are helping the victims to better address things that are reported. Because of course, currently reporting is not working really well. If whatever happened online is not an infraction to the current legislation, or if the police or law enforcement don't deem it serious enough to take any action. And so it's really an important piece to have this multi-stakeholder engagement and collaboration. And the tech companies level, the platforms, we can also do a lot if we are able to collaborate with other partners to improve our algorithm that will detect online comments that are bad. We at Jigsaw have developed a tool like that called Perspective, which basically learns from human moderators to detect bad comments. And so you can report that much more easily because it's done by algorithm at scale, instead of having humans read every single thing, or victims have to go through their own feed again and being potentially exposed to it another time, which can be emotionally hard. So it's really about this multi-stakeholder collaboration.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for explaining how both of your platforms are trying to combat this issue. It makes it a safer place, not only for women and girls, but also, content creators and people like Cia and Cecilia that share their life online. When the platform is safer for us, it's safer for us to share our life, and therefore, spread the good things and the positive things and how people are supposed to treat each other a little easier. So thank you so much. I appreciate that. And thank you so much to everyone on the panel today. Thank you for being with us and sharing your story and how you are contributing to combating this global issue that we have. We need to do better for ourselves to take care of each other and take care of our women and girls. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.